Do not walk away from thousands of dollars in VA disability payments. Hey, I am Chuck the Bureaucrat, and today I'm going to talk about 4 ways that service members can lose out on massive VA disability payments. And along the way, I'm going to share my thoughts on how to avoid those mistakes. Of course, as always, I'm looking for your comments on additional traps and ways to avoid those pitfalls. All right, there is a pathway to VA disability ratings. This pathway is a natural and normal part of everybody's military journey. In fact, you're going to go down this path whether you like it or not. And the reason that many people don't end up with a VA disability rating or the rating that they should get is simply because they don't take the right steps along the way. So here's the pathway. You are going to do your military job, whether that's jumping out of airplanes or hauling fuel all over God's creation or sitting in some dark skiff hunched over video imagery. During the course of doing your military job, you're going to experience symptoms of illnesses and injuries. Some of those symptoms you'll ignore, and then others, well, you'll go see the doc. When you go to see the doctor, they're going to document your symptoms, and they might diagnose some kind of injury or illness. In the fullness of time, and one way or another, your military career will come to an end, and you'll probably submit a claim to the VA. Now, whether or not you get an approved VA disability rating really depends on how you handled each step along this path. So, the first way that people lose out on VA benefits is that they fail to connect their injuries or illnesses to their military service. This all has to do with that first step down the pathway of doing your military job. These VA disability ratings are either going to be service-connected or combat-related. So you want to be able to draw a reasonably clear line between your military service and the injuries and illnesses that you experience. It doesn't have to be a perfectly straight line, but it does have to be reasonably clear. A good way to do this is just by doing your job and then going to see your primary care manager on a regular basis. In fact, and this is particularly true once you hit that point in your career that you know you are going to try to stay in until you earn a retirement, it is a good idea to schedule an appointment with your PCM after every major field exercise and deployment. The reason I say this is, well, suppose you're on a detail unloading a truckload of supplies and some idiot drops a box of MREs on your head. You might go visit the battalion aid station, but to be honest, their real concern is just to stop the bleeding, make sure you don't have a concussion, and get you back to work. Whereas your PCM is much better qualified to determine if there's any permanent damage from that incident, and your PCM is also going to place that incident in your medical record. You see how that pathway flows? Even when you're just thinking about that first step, that step of connecting your injuries and illnesses to your service, you also are thinking about the follow-on steps. And before we leave this topic of doing your military job, I want to talk about how that applies to so-called combat-related injuries and illnesses. When you are engaged in combat-related activities, that doctor's follow-up appointment is even more critical. I mean, some mysterious complaint that doesn't get written down until 18 months after you redeploy, well, later it's going to be really hard to suggest that it was combat-related. The second way that people lose out on VA benefits is by not going to see their PCM at all. In effect, by hiding symptoms. My brother has this joke he tells whenever the doctor asks if he has a family history of anything. He says, yeah, we got a family history of not going to the doctor until it's too late. And there are natural forces built into the military culture that are going to discourage you from seeking medical care. That 32-year-old infantry sergeant does not want the 20-year-old hotshots to know just how much his knees hurt after a ruck march. That major whose shoulder makes a funny clicking noise, well, he's kind of worried about what would happen to his career if anybody found out. There is even an article of UCMJ custom made to punish people that the command suspects of malingering. It all encourages service members to hide symptoms, not report them to medical professionals, and thus not have them documented as part of their medical file. So what do? Well, do not hide symptoms from your PCM. When you go to see your doctor, tell them what you are experiencing. When you submit your VA claim, the VA doctors are going to look at your medical history, and if it's blank, then you must be fine. The third way that people miss out on VA benefits is by not showing a diagnosis and treatment history. And really, this has a lot to do with that third step in the pathway that I keep talking about. You do your job, you experience your symptoms, and then you go to see the doctor. Well, you can be pretty confident that the doctor is going to document your symptoms. But you don't get VA disability ratings based off of symptoms. You get them off of diagnoses. And there is no guarantee that your doctor is going to take the symptoms you report and make a diagnosis or prescribe further treatment. And I don't know, maybe that's okay when the symptoms first crop up. You know, the doctor just describes it as undefined pain in left shoulder, and they prescribe you some Motrin and some multivitamins. But by the time the VA is looking at your medical records, they are looking for diagnoses. They are trying to align the diagnostic codes used by your PCM to the diagnostic codes used by the VA schedule for disability ratings. And in many cases, they're using your treatment history to determine the severity of your condition in order to give you a rating for your disability. And so, if you go to your PCM and they don't diagnose your condition or even give you a treatment plan, that is going to frustrate the VA claim process. In fact, that might be the biggest thing to be looking out for. Are the doctors making a diagnosis? And I'm just going to warn you here, the doctors are probably going to want to run more tests. And what do you think's going to happen if you don't go to those tests? If you stop seeking care, the record is going to indicate that the symptoms went away. That is just one more reason to regularly visit your PCM and the specialist that they refer you to get to a diagnosis. The fourth way that people botch their VA claim happens at the end of their service, when they finally become eligible to submit a claim. I mean, the simplest way to screw this all up is not to submit a claim at all. That might happen out of some residual desire to continue hiding symptoms. Or the process might just seem god-awful and not worth the effort. But even people who do submit a claim can delay their submission long enough to create a problem for themselves. Nowadays, there's a program called Benefits Delivered at Discharge, which allows veterans to submit their claim 180 to 90 days before they officially leave their active duty military status. There's a number of reasons why this is the way to go, but probably the most obvious is that it makes it much easier to connect your conditions to your service. If you wait 2-3 years after you ETS or retire, you might have some symptoms and conditions that crop up after your military service ended. In fact, if you wait to seek care for those symptoms and conditions until you're already out, it's going to be a lot harder to claim that the condition is service-connected. If you're worried that the entire process is just too complicated, well, the good news is that many veteran support organizations offer assistance in submitting your initial claim. So I would say, no matter who you are, I would encourage you to seek out a good VSO. And then there is one last consideration about your VA disability claim that's important to know. Some people don't submit a claim because they figure that their aches and pains are all part of the natural aging process and that they're not disabilities at all. Well, there is something very interesting about the way the VA views age, and that is they do not take age into consideration when evaluating a service-connected condition. That's right. The natural effect of aging on your joints and your bodily functions, that is excluded from the evaluation of your VA claim. So you might be just as fit as any other 45-year-old out there, but that's not exactly the same way that the VA looks at it. So there you have it. 4 ways that people set themselves up for reduced VA benefits. Not making a service connection, hiding symptoms, not getting a diagnosis and treatment history, and by not submitting a timely claim. So look, the Army, the Marine Corps, whatever your service is, they're going to take every opportunity to screw you over. Please don't do it to yourself. Now, there is an important topic that we did not discuss today, and that is how to avoid having the VA take away your disability ratings once you have received them. That is an upcoming video that initially is going to be available in a members-only status. But in the meantime, I think it's valuable to you to take a look at this video to understand how the VA definition of a disability is radically different than the definitions used by just about every other federal agency.